Hello and welcome to another episode of The Diplomats, brought to you by diplomacybriefing.com, which this week has a Champions Corner article from our very own Ed Sullivan. You join Eric and me and a very special guest for a special interview episode, third place player Matthew Crill. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, giving up your wonderful time. So you're up in the Seattle area, did you say?
Yeah, I'm just a little bit north of Seattle in Everett, Washington, and been living up here for about 10 years now.
You've managed to avoid the pull of DixieCon and the migration southeast for this weekend.
Yes.
So
yes,
we're very lucky to have you instead of David Hood grabbing you. Eric, you're traveling between two places. Be safe. And we're going to have a look at the final from your Italian perspective, Crill. So you went into this game, and remind me, did you drop in the power selection?
Yeah, I actually dropped one spot in the power selection from third to fourth, and wanted to do that to drive Ed to have to make a decision before me about where he wanted to play, east or west, and have the benefit of a tiebreaker. And I felt that I actually would have been happy with Russia, Germany, or Italy in this position. So I didn't see any downside to dropping down a position and having a little bit better tiebreaker.
Yeah, went for the better tiebreaker option and still had a good choice of powers to select.
Yeah, to me those three are kind of a toss-up.
If you had not dropped at your first opportunity, which country would you have picked?
I think I would have taken Germany, but I was still a little bit apprehensive about what was really going to happen between Jordan and Greg, as were they just going to form a tight alliance? I wasn't upset with not having to get in the middle of that.
I see. So you were worried about an EF?
Yeah, I think. I mean, they're both amazing players, and so I felt like that was a very real possibility. And so, I think I would have been fine if I needed to have Germany, but I also felt like Ed was probably going to take that, and I figured I would let him, handle that.
You played with all these guys before?
I hadn't played with Greg or Tarsier before. The others I've played with in virtual face-to-face, or face-to-face in some cases.
You can look them in the eye and see what you could see what their tell was up front and see if that came across.
That's
right. Okay, so given that, then, what were your initial thoughts about who to work with? How did correspondence go in spring 1901? Because Venice to Piedmont we don't see all that often.
Yeah, so my very first message was from Jordan, proposing this, and Ed also chiming in that he was very much in favor of moving against France. And then I had John saying that he was going to be making very pro-Italian moves, and willing to, pressure Russia. And Karthik also seemed fine with me focusing on the West and, not having Greg grow out of control. So I really felt like all the players around the board were really in favor of me applying some early pressure to Greg. And my vision there was to try and grab some of those Iberian centers and have that be my early growth instead of playing as much in the East.
Did your previous encounter with John when he subbed into one of your games in the prelims have any sort of impact on this decision to not go east?
Not really. I mean,
Okay.
in that game, I think it was 1 game year, and he subbed in as Italy in a position that was stalemated, and all he had to do was hold the stalemate line for 1 year, and then everybody drew.
Okay.
So I played with him, virtual face-to-face in some games before. I didn't have any, preconceived notions about any of the players coming in that really guided my decisions. It was really what happened on this board that guided that.
It's a good way to do it. Good way to play.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jordan was the. Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah.
Karthik is a player with a lot of reputation, especially on the Nexus servers. What were your initial feelings about being back to back in an Italy-Austria arrangement with Karthik?
Yeah, no, I was, Karthik did talk a lot about a central alliance, about an AI alliance. I was fully on board with that. I've played with Karthik quite a bit, actually, on the virtual face-to-face. We even played face-to-face games at Carnage back last November. So, I know that Karthik is a great player. I know that he's somebody that, is very level-headed and good to work with in an alliance. So I really felt like I could keep all my options open here, and was very open to working with Karthik as well.
Right.
I guess one other thing to comment here in this spring is, I had talked to Karthik about loaning Trieste, right, as the other option. But he wasn't open to that, so I also wasn't really in favor of going to go jump on Turkey early. And so that also helped guide that I didn't really have anything to do with that army. So Piedmont was a good option to put some pressure on France.
You didn't fancy Tyrol or anything like that?
Yeah.
Then again,
okay with that.
If Germany and England are both saying, let's go in on it, let's go on against France, then.
Yeah,
and especially when France is the
there.
defending champion, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So you must have been pretty happy when you saw these moves, and they corresponded with what you were being told. Sure, Munich goes to Ruhr, but that's about it, right? Or you're expecting that anyway?
I was expecting that because everything I heard was Greg was going to support himself into Burgundy.
Got to be happy with those Turkish moves against Russia.
Yeah, I didn't know what he was going to do, but yeah, I was happy to see those.
So let's have a wander into the fall then. And you have a guess here over Marseille.
Right, and I can't remember if we talked about bouncing there or not. But basically, yeah, I was just trying to go for a guess there and keep that army in Burgundy occupied. Mainly to avoid him getting Belgium, right? That was really my goal at that point.
Did you know that Jordan was trying the convoy to Brest?
No, I didn't know any specific moves up there.
Because it's not beyond the realm of possibility that Jordan goes somewhere else, Mao picks up Portugal, and suddenly he's got 2 builds to put down and an open Marseille in which to build a fleet.
Yeah, but I felt pretty comfortable with Jordan here. We talked a lot, and I really felt like he was fully committed to attacking France and wasn't going to let up on that. Yeah.
Well, it certainly seemed to be the case as it happened. Yeah. You chose not to do the convoy. which looks to my eyes that you're still looking to move west against France here.
Yeah, so John and his moves, showed that he was going to keep pressing Russia and wasn't going to be sending fleets my direction. So I decided I would focus on the west, and going to Rome again was just to keep Austria happy, and really intentionally trying to kind of slow play that, but keep an army back home for defense was really my goal there.
Cover Venice if suddenly
Yeah.
Austria comes after you for some reason.
Right.
Okay. Anything to say at this juncture, Eric?
Well, he just answered it. I was going to comment. I remember at the time that we weren't really big fans of the move to Rome. The advantage of Rome is that if Austria does slide into Venice, then you've got Piedmont and Rome to kick them out of Venice. It just seemed like very, very passive play, but you just explained it. You wanted to keep Carthage happy, which I think was the only reasonable explanation for it that anyone would have come up with. So, do you think that being so in retrospect, do you think that being so accommodating to Carthage was the right move to make?
I do think so. What I think typically happens is Italy, if you jump on Austria early or provide a lot of pressure there, you'll galvanize an RT. That's what typically happens. And what I wanted to have was for some time to pass to see that Russia and Turkey were truly going to fight before I even thought about coming at Austria. But that wasn't even on my mind at this point here. I was just going to focus on the West, and just kind of monitor what happened in the East. I had the luxury of time. I think that's one of the benefits of Italy, is you have some time to just, kind of futz around in the middle of the board, and that's okay.
I did wonder at the time where these early years were happening, whether this was sort of misdirection from a potential RT. That clearly turned out not to be the case, which I guess then gave you the freedom to go and help, pile in on Austria.
We'll talk about
their
the
attention. I think there was some chat in Discord as the game progressed that maybe you and France had a deal all along that you wouldn't attack each other, but you're saying that these are genuine attempts to push against France and take Iberia early on.
And Greg had never, we'd never actually even talked about Piedmont before the spring moves, so it was a surprise to Greg as well that I was there, and I was just trying to provide pressure and counting on England and Germany coming to fight him as well.
Half of which happened, I guess. Okay, you put down a fleet in Naples, which is pretty uncontroversial.
Yep.
And it continues to give you that flexibility. You can cover Venice and have a pop at Marseille. So you were looking at a pretty stable spot here with options still.
Yeah, I felt pretty good about where things were at this point.
Did you speak to John about his build?
I mean, I had expected an army, from him, but I also didn't feel like I had much, control on what he was going to build at this point.
Anything to say, Eric, before we have a look at 1902?
I'm wondering, Matt, at any point in 1902 until after the fall moves came out, did you have any idea at all what Spencer had in store for Carthage?
No idea. And the spring moves where they moved on Ed, I had no idea that was going to happen either.
Spring moves, the move towards the stalemate, onto the stalemate line here.
as someone who didn't have prior knowledge, what was your reaction when you saw those spring moves? And then a separate question, what was your response when you saw those fall moves?
Yeah, after I saw these spring moves up to the line, that was the first time I thought that I might need to go move on Karthik. Because if an AR is happening here, I'm going to be Karthik's next target after they go get some builds off of Germany. Right. So, Karthik never tipped me off that this was happening. I never heard from Russia about this. I didn't like this because I felt like I was going to be next on the list if they were moving together in this manner.
Did you engage in conversation with John about those concerns?
Yeah, we're talking. At this point, it was keeping our options open, and we'll see in the fall that I got support into Greece, and that was partially due to what we saw here with this AR, and it was also what Karthik had agreed to as well, that he was okay with that support.
Before we just wander into the, I just want to ask about your fleet movements down here, because I think we were pointing out that this felt like slow playing at the time. If you're going after Iberia, even if you want to cover Ionian, Tunis to West would seem like the move.
Well, part of it was John building a fleet in Khan and still having Karthik's fleet sitting there in Greece. I just didn't want to leave Ionian empty and have that be a temptation, kind of like, I guess, the North Sea wound up being that temptation for for Ed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't want Ionian to be something that somebody thought they could just sneak into while I was over in the West.
Okay.
In follow too, did you know that Armenia was getting slingshotted back to Bulgaria?
No.
Okay. So I was asking you about how you felt when you saw Austria and Russia cooperating and moving up and putting Ed in a hurt box. And then you made the decision that you were going to go ahead and start making some moves on Karthik to break that up. And then lo and behold, you see moves that now make you got to worry about an RT. So what was your thought process there?
Well, to be fair, in fall of 1902 here, I was still just keeping my options open. Okay. I hadn't decided to go move on Karthik at this point. I just started thinking that might be necessary. And everything around Greece was arranged, so things are still good between Karthik and myself. You see, I didn't cover Venice because I knew he would be going after Munich. And so, yes, I was concerned about Russia and Turkey cooperating here, but I also felt like in my conversations with John that he was willing to go back and focus on Russia again, even at this point.
So let's talk about this Greece incident, because it feels like there's some differing sort of tales in actually what was going on here. Correct me if I'm wrong. So you see an Austria that's about to go up 2.
Yep.
And you want to be in alliance with them, or at least have the option of staying aligned with them. And so you want to even it up by picking up your 5th dot in Greece.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
So how was it originally mooted that this was going to happen? Or had John already offered support?
So John had offered support. Karthik and I had been talking about me getting Greece to help balance things out, just like you're saying. But what Karthik was expecting, and to be frank, I was undecided about this at this point. I wanted my options open. But what Karthik expected was that I would then support Greece out to Aegean, because John still wouldn't be getting another build, right? And then we would press Turkey. That was Karthik's view. I was open to that, but I was undecided. I really wanted to keep my options open here and really just focus on getting that 5th dot and see how things developed from there.
So you'd said to Karthik, well, I won't do that. I'm going to take Greece instead.
Well, no. The idea was spring of 1903, I would support Greece out to Aegean.
Oh, okay.
He would backfill into Greece. And then I would keep going over in Eastern Med, and Greece would stay mine back behind the line.
Okay.
But that all changed, when Karthik lost Bulgaria, which was
he's
unexpected.
going down a dot instead of up one.
Right. And so we had a lot of talks about disbanding that fleet. I felt like it was unreasonable for Karthik to keep that fleet in this position, and his pitch to me was to still do the same plan that we had agreed upon, right? Except this time, John was going to be building and probably putting down another fleet so he could hold Aegean. And basically all that would happen is that Karthik would take Greece from me, and I would go back down to 4 centers. And maybe he'd be able to take Bulgaria back. But Karthik really focused here on saying, my only chances this game are to keep that fleet alive, which I understand, but I was looking at this more from the alliance play that he was just going to let Russia and Turkey run over him if he didn't kill that fleet and put an army in Budapest. Yeah. So I don't feel like those negotiations went well. Yeah, we kind of technically agreed on this path, but I was not happy with how this was going.
Yeah, so ultimately, Karthik decides not to retreat off the board and retreat to Albania instead, which not only keeps that fleet around, which is going to be a little annoying to you, but also means he can't rebuild an army
Right.
in Budapest. How is your relationship with Russia at this point? Are you expecting an RT to break out at this point?
Yeah, that was possible, but the fleet in Romania, right, would still slow things down some for a true RT to form. And really what Karthik and Spencer were still talking about here was having an heir to go after Turkey.
Okay.
And try and keep him pinned in. Like I said, I was still keeping my options open, but I still felt like if the two of them, Austria and Russia, if they got back on the same page with each other and we did an heir to go take out Turkey, that I was still likely the next target. Especially with Austria getting builds out of that whole process. And, Karthik was really focused on his growth and trying to get back, to 5-6 centers. So I guess the way that I would describe it is, it was an air pitch, but to where I was expected to just play along because Italy should always want Turkey to die, right? That's how it felt to me.
Okay, and you weren't convinced by that because you thought, well, yeah, Turkey is dead, and then me.
Yeah, and also I struggled to see where my growth was, except being overextended and having a bunch of units over in Turkey, which I felt would take a long time. And I just didn't like that. I didn't like that pitch, I guess.
So at the same time as you take this, if you take Greece, you also move training to Ionian and Rome to Apulia. So is this you abandoning? I know Piedmont does hit Marseille, but have you given up on Iberia now?
Well, we didn't really talk about spring of 1902 with Germany there, but at the same time that he moved up against England, Germany came at the I think maybe 10 minutes before the moves were due and said, I'm not going to Burgundy after all.
Okay.
And
Right. So
I didn't
the
know
idea was
what he
about-
was going to do, but I could tell that Germany was getting cold feet. Ed was getting cold feet about really going after France.
Okay.
And so that's when I kind of abandoned still going after Iberia. France had a clear build in his pocket. I just didn't see how I was going to be able to gain from that. And Jordan was still working hard to get us to turn around and doing joint pitches and everything, but I just didn't feel like the East would ever truly let me have some growth and go after France in full force. I just didn't see that happening.
Okay. And then, so this on this turn, you thought, right, let's swing it.
I gotta come back east.
If you're not going after Turkey, then there's only one who you can go after. So at this point, you already, I know you obviously spooked the previous turn by Austria. Are you thinking at this point, right? I'm going to convoy into Albania.
No, I wasn't, but I kept my options open and obviously made that decision for the spring.
So you,
I was still trying to work things out with
it could still be air from here, I suppose.
Yeah.
But did Karthik ask about these moves when they came through? Could that be partly why he retreated?
I don't think so. I mean, I still felt like we had a good relationship. Everything had been in agreement about Greece. But there was still, I was still a little bit of, upset. I didn't really communicate to him, but that what he had done in the spring was why he had lost Bulgaria. I felt like he should have told me if he was going after Greece, if we were really having a strong alliance between us.
Yeah.
So there was some tension there, but I don't think that I made moves to really go hard against Karthik here. But for the coming year, I had to start thinking about where my growth was going to come from.
You had options, yeah, because you're still, you've only just got to 5 on this.
Yeah.
On this turn. Well, no army Venice. So you're not being dead aggressive. You're still, keeping your options open with the Naples build. Did you know when you built what that you were going to shift the fleets?
Yeah, I did.
At some point between fall and winter, you decided this was going to happen.
Yeah, and a lot of it was just the negotiations about retreating that fleet and not disbanding it. That kind of sat with me for a while.
That's quite a pivotal moment in the game from your perspective.
Yeah, and talking to John, he was fully willing to go back against Russia here, and that also was the big decision point for me to make. Okay, I could have either gone with the air here, or if John was willing to go back after Russia, then I felt more comfortable about going at Austria here. And so, yeah, I built the fleet in Naples as a misdirection so that he wouldn't cover Adriatic.
Trixie. Okay. At this point, obviously, we have an FG blossoming, and England looks in trouble. What have you got any idea what's happening in the north between, or what's about to happen with Germany and Russia?
No, I mean, I wasn't surprised to see them continuing to cooperate, especially after there was a fleet build in Berlin, which still left Munich vulnerable. So I wasn't surprised that they continued to cooperate But that was another reason for wanting Turkey to go focus on Russia, to keep Spencer from growing too much here.
Matt,
Yeah.
it had the appearance through most of the game that you and Greg had reached a decision to leave each other alone. That big, huge France-Italy DMZ is one of the nicest, biggest, friendliest DMCs you can have when you can build it. I was very surprised to hear you say that at first you wanted to get your dots out of Iberia, because I think most people who watch this game spend most of the game thinking that you and Greg had made the decision to leave each other alone and to give each other as much room as possible, other than that early move to Piedmont. And it's pretty clear at some point you guys did get to that point, and that it stayed that way all the way up until the very, very end of the game. Tell everybody how you and Greg's relationship on that point of leaving each other alone in the med, how did that develop?
Okay. Yeah. So in 1901, my move to Piedmont, my heart was with Jordan and what he was pitching along with Greg, which was to go take on France, to where I would get the Iberian centers, and then that would fuel my growth to be a player in the East later on in the game. Greg did not know I was coming to Piedmont. That was a source of tension between us for a long time, where he would constantly ask me to pull it back. But yeah, if Ed had committed like he had said he was going to, then I would have kept attacking Greg and gone after France there. But when Ed turned and got that jump on Jordan, that's when, more out of necessity, I said, well, I'm not going to get my builds off France anytime soon. And that's where we negotiated that DMZ and stuck to it for a long time, until Greg violated it towards the end.
It wasn't really an amicable deal between you and Greg. It was just the very pragmatic decision that you weren't going to play Don Quixote.
Yeah. I think both of us were just, trying to be realists about the fact that we weren't really going to gain off each other in this position.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, pragmatic's a good word for it. I think that's the way we both kind of approached this game.
Okay. Go ahead.
So we're about to enter the stage of the game where we've got Germany, who's board leader at this point, and they're about to have a mini explosion. They're about to go through some rapid growth in this part of the game. I suppose you're relying on Russia and France to make sure that doesn't happen, and no one. Was there a feeling during this game as we can't let any one player get too far ahead?
There was a bit of that, but you'll see a point in here where I kind of intentionally helped Ed's growth a little bit
in the Balkans.
In the Balkans, and that whole goal there was to try and get France and Germany to fight, right?
Okay.
Right. So
playing chicken.
I needed to have France and Germany both big enough that they would kind of stalemate each other once they went at each other. That was kind of that big picture. And so I was okay with Ed growing some, because I always felt like France would be there to balance him out.
Was it frustrating, therefore, that they were passing dots between? Like I know Belgium sort of got past. You think that wasn't part of the plan?
Yeah, no, there was a lot of that. Yeah, throughout the game, I expected them to fight way sooner than they kind of did towards the end.
What was your strategic and emotional response when you saw Greg and Ed playing those games, trading London and trading Belgium back and forth with each other?
It's fundamentally why, I had a good relationship with John, is because yes, he was creeping into my center some, but in that later game, he was helping tip me off on what they were planning, and I needed somebody in my corner because the two of them were just, sticking close together no matter what.
The game may have ended the way it ended, but I'm still getting those guys a pair of Care Bears.
Good. They deserve that.
Says the person who did 17-17 at Whipping last year. Just throwing that out there.
I have my Care Bear tendencies too, but I didn't in this game.
17 splits are a whipping tradition. They're not really there to play diplomacy. They're just there to go drink gin.
I will have. I'm sold. I'm right. I'm gonna have to. Silverman. I'm gonna have to come and join. Right. Okay. So you've made the decision to turn on Austria here, and you do. Piedmont into Venice with support. You move into the Adriatic. Were you supposed to vacate Greece here to give it him back, or was he just chancing?
Yeah, I was supposed to go Greece to Aegean with support from Ionian.
Okay.
And he would backfill there.
Nope.
Yeah.
Okay. So you think you've sort of got Austria on side, so you're not worried about losing Greece, but also you're happy that you've got John on side because you're going after not him, but Austria. So did John know that you were turning on Austria?
I think we talked about that. I can't remember specifically, but I think so. I knew Ed was coming down into Tyrolia. So Ed offered that as well to help me get a center off of Carthage, was what he proposed.
You welcome that?
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't. You could stop it if you wanted, I suppose.
Yeah, but Ed was also pitching the two of us working together there in the Balkans.
Germany and Italy isn't a bad. They sort of balance. They complement each other quite nicely, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And Austria looks in a whole world of trouble. And here you go. Here comes the attack. You're into Trieste. You're keeping. You're not losing Greece. He couldn't have taken it because you assure the taps on Albania and from Serbia from John. Did you know Ed was getting support into Vienna from Galicia?
No, I knew that Ed was going to tap Vienna, but I didn't know that he was getting support into there. So that was a surprise.
Both win here.
What was it like as an experienced player watching another experienced player plunging as Germany so far south of the stalemate line down into dots that he did not have a chance in hell of keeping?
Yeah, I thought he was leaving his door, his back door too open to Greg to come in there. And that's why I fundamentally I was still worried about Greg at this point, not Ed, for that reason that you're talking about.
As were we, if you recall our commentary. Yeah.
He just walks out. Yeah, it's walking east. Which surely, if you're Russia here, you've got to be a bit concerned.
Yeah, but you also, even as Russia, right? You're probably asking yourself, well, isn't France just going to come up into Ruhr here? And is Germany really going to be able to keep attacking me? And I know they had negotiated Sweden and so forth. So I don't think Russia was worried quite yet. And I think France's lack of moving on Germany, right, was, why he didn't respond more forcefully against Germany here.
Did you try and convince Spencer that he was making a mistake trusting Ed like that?
No, not really, because like I said again, I felt like this was just going to be Ed's spike, similar to what Karthik looked like, you know, the previous year, and that it was going to be Ed's turn to be beat back down by France, and then Russia would rebound to be fine.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
I knew John was going to convoy back over to Armenia. We talked about not leaving that open to Russia.
Okay, so you were on board with this move. It wasn't a demand from you. It was just a negotiated.
It was just a recommendation, even that I made to John, and this was the way for us to work together.
Because that means, well, we'll see what it means in a minute. He hasn't got an army to support himself. An army build from you here, and that fleet goes. That's good.
Yeah.
Presumably you're thinking Albania here again. Oh no, we're in Trieste, but Albania this time. Right.
So this was a big turning point here. I think John walked through this pretty well in detail about how there was a three-way thread about the Kill Krill plan, where Karthik would have bounced me in Albania. John would have taken Greece, and Ed would have helped, you know, knock me down as a competitor in this game. But obviously John leaked that to me, and, you know, I asked him if he wanted to support into Serbia. I hadn't thought beyond that about what I was going to do with him in Serbia. I was just grateful for John being able to work with me and tip me off on that plan. And, you know, still saw that he was, you know, focusing on attacking Russia. And so I felt like things were in pretty good shape here. And
one of these having a go at Sev yet again, we've seen so much around.
Yeah. And glad to see Greg in the West move from Mid-Atlantic up to North Atlantic, right? I mean, our DMZ was working well for both of us.
Yes, yeah. So those French fleets moving as far away from you as possible.
Yeah.
If you're Italy, yeah, French fleets in NAO, Irish and English Channel are good places for them to be, right?
Yeah, you know, I wish I had been able to help Jordan more here, but there just wasn't really a good opportunity after the FG took off.
Yeah, Jordan's in a world of pain as soon as there's an army on the island, and now his waters are surrounded as well.
Yeah.
Did you know what was happening here with this impending German stab? Oh, well, I suppose this is where it happens here with that move to Silesia. This German stab on Russia coming.
But John had mentioned that Vienna to Galicia was the plan, but I didn't know about the move up into Silesia. I don't think
it is the German stab in all its glory. Russia doesn't pick up Budapest, loses Norway to Germany.
Yeah,
and at the same time, I'm presuming this is a stab on Turkey from you. No, sorry, thanks for tipping me off, and thanks for allowing me to defend myself. Thanks for helping me get rid of that Austrian army. I'll let you into Serbia, and now I'll boot you back out of it and blow it up.
Well, you know, I wish I could say that I had thought deeply enough about this to like plan it that way, but it was more that after the spring moves happened, because we decided pretty close to the deadline to make this switch, that it was at that point that I just realized that my only real opportunity to be a real player this game was to really try and control the Balkans. And it wasn't an easy decision to go take Serbia, but I think it was the right one for that point in the game.
It was definitely the right one. Definitely the right one.
Yeah, but it wasn't like a long con setup to pull him into Serbia or something. It was more, well, I think this is the right move to make from this position.
Seeing the board in front of you and reacting accordingly.
Yeah.
But I mean, the great thing for you is here that it's not instead of Austrian armies being in these centers, we've got armies of different colors.
Yep.
We've got an Austrian army in Vienna, a German army in Budapest, as you've said already. This fleet in Romania, and so Germany isn't going to hold on to these centers long term, and you're the only one who's likely to profit when they inevitably fall.
Yeah, this was also the point where, Spencer was also pitching more to try and do a wintergreen here, and we talked about that some, but it just continued to be a case where Germany got too good of a head start against him for Spencer to really be able to work with me well in the Balkans. So we talked about that. It was always an option here, but Ed kind of was able to keep that from ever truly happening. And I also felt like I owed John a lot for what he had done to help me in this position.
Despite the attack on Serbia.
Despite that, right. And I didn't know how that was going to pan out, right? But I needed to do that.
How was your conversation with him after this?
He was actually pretty understanding about, of that being a good move, and the type of move that I needed to make. But I expected there was going to be, consequences from stabbing him like that.
So you've seen the conversation that Lex and I had with John.
Yep.
And he'd said that that he'd come to you, I think fairly early on in the game, and made the pitch that he will help you win as long as you don't force it. Is that how you understand that?
I think it was more about the mid game, in my view, than early on in the game. And I think it was more because of how tight Ed and Greg were in the West, and how they were trying to negotiate with him and to try and push him to attack me. We had a lot of conversations there about how he was willing to help me gain centers at the very end if I didn't push for them, and how he. But I still always felt like John was still trying to angle for his own opportunity the whole time. So
that brings me to my question, because Chris asked if that was how you understood it, and it's really the wrong question. I don't think it's very hard to understand the point and offer that he's making. The correct question was, did you believe him?
My heart wanted to believe him, right? Because I wanted in my heart for him to be willing at the end to give me back Bulgaria and Greece, and be willing to do that. But my mind said, this can just be John trying to con me as well and go for his own opportunity. And we'll talk more about that as it progresses. But I always felt like I could never be fully certain that that's really what John was going to do at the end of the game.
But we're not quite there on that pitch yet. Did it come after this? Okay.
Yeah, it was after this, yeah.
At this point, we lose England. Could have defended himself, but I think it had enough with well, with Ed, by the looks of it, with those supports into hell.
Yep.
This is still going to make you very happy. This fighting between Russia and Turkey, but the fleet building Smyrna less so.
Yeah, but I had just stabbed him in Serbia.
Yeah.
We were talking, but it wasn't like we were, best friends working to get along here at this point. So I wasn't surprised by him making that build to cover Eastern Med.
Yeah, I mean, you've still got plenty of fleets down there.
Yeah.
And he can't defend Bulgaria as it is.
Right.
An army build from you, so as you say, sort of looking to secure the Balkans. An army build from France in Marseille, though. So does that tie you down a little bit here?
Not really. We talked about Piedmont continuing to be a DMZ, and I felt like he was going to continue to honor that.
Okay. Well, yeah, I suppose he's on to a good thing in the north if he's just feeding off sort of German castaways.
Yeah, I mean, I expected him to keep going after Germany here, right? Everything's already up in the north. That's just what I expected.
Well, I mean, why fight if you're getting stuff for free, I guess.
I guess so.
But we do have a Germany at 10 now to your and Greg's 7 each.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of the most fun moves in the game. This double convoy from Albania into Bulgaria. How can you not smile at that?
Yeah.
That must have been. You must have been pretty pleased when you thought of that.
I loved that. Absolutely loved it.
Well, thanks. I knew that John was going to go back and cover Khan. He was clear that he wasn't going to try and hold that. And Spencer was willing to tap black, right, which guaranteed this. And basically Spencer's request was that I could help him cover Rum. He could keep that fleet there to tap black. And I already had this plan in here, and Spencer came to me and said, hey, it would be great to just convoy from Albania around to Bulgaria. I said, well, yeah, that's already my my orders that I have in. So it wasn't just me that saw this. I was trying to play nice with Ed here by not going to Tyrolia. He was pretty adamant about that. And I didn't see a reason to upset him, especially since I expected France to keep coming at him. And if Ed's not upset with me, right, then I'm in a good position there to be getting Ed's help instead of being viewed as one of his enemies.
And these French fleets are moving towards the North Sea here. So that looks like France is going to finally go for it.
Yeah, and I think that Ed viewed this as a stab, or at least that's what he tried to communicate, that he felt like Greg stabbed him here by convoying down into Picardy and advancing his fleets like he did.
So you were still trying to play nice with Germany. You don't want to upset the apple cart.
Yep.
I do love the fact that your support for Sev to Rum save keeps that fleet around that John's been trying to get rid of for 4 years. Nearly went.
It was a fun play, and this is probably the point where Russia and I tried to see if there was an option to work together here, but Ed's advances just that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, Russia has got some problems in the north. Well, and the south too, I guess.
So I'm still cordial with John down there, but I sort of was taking Bulgaria, and that was he knew that was coming. Wasn't much that could be done.
So he understood that was happening. Are you thinking at this point, I'm going to stop advancing against John and look somewhere else? And in which case, where are you looking?
My next target really was those Balkan centers. I knew I was always going to have a hard time digging John out of the corner, so I was never really to focus on trying to attack him. And, I felt like we were mending things back despite me taking Serbia and Bulgaria here. We were still on good terms with each other and still talking a lot.
So yeah, here's a bit of a pivot. You finish off Austria by supporting Germany, but you're not tempted to follow up with like Serbia to Budapest, and you're not tempted to do the other way around, support Austria into Budapest.
Yeah, so the agreement from Ed here was that he was going to build a fleet and go after France from gaining Vienna.
Mm-hmm.
That was the pitch.
So when you saw these moves when it adjudicated, are you thinking, I don't think he's going to do that?
No, this was expected, right? He couldn't stop Eddie from falling. He couldn't stop Belgium from falling. I expected he could take Warsaw and St. Petersburg, right, to break even. So him gaining Vienna was going to give him one build, which was supposed to be a fleet.
Well, you just moved Berlin to Baltic, which is the wrong way if you're going.
I agree with that. I agree with that too. But from that position, right, he could still build a fleet in Kiel, move Baltic back to Denmark. He still had the position to be able to rotate back.
Yeah, that's true. I was looking at North as well, but I suppose that
Berlin,
North always to stop the retreat, isn't it?
It's to stop the fleet. Yeah, the retreat up there. Berlin to Baltic here, is the same as Berlin to Kiel if you're going to be able to get a build. So I didn't. Yeah.
Russia's also losing in the south. They've lost Sev. So it looked like Russia is about to implode by the looks of it. So there's going to be a bit of a vacuum, which it looks like Germany is going to benefit from.
Right. But, I felt like France was going to be coming at him in force here. France was going to be at 9 centers.
Yeah.
And so that was the big concern I felt here. So that's why I was trying to help Ed.
Okay. So is it 11-9? Yeah, 11-9-8 for 2. We've lost Austria, lost Karthik.
Yep.
Also lost Eric, but he's on his way back. I'm
coming right back.
Recording in progress.
Okay.
That'll be the end of my mediocre performance. Sorry about that.
It's all right. So yeah, the army build in Berlin, I was pretty upset by. And that was one of many low points in my relationship with Ed, which kind of got worse from here.
The expected fleet kill.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, Matthew, that Army Berlin build, that upset me as well.
Well, good. I'm glad I'm not alone.
So how did the conversation go between you and Ed after this build came through?
He said, I had to negotiate this with Greg. I can still move it over here to Kiel and still keep Holland. I'm going to move against him. And at the same time, Greg had told me specifically he wasn't going to build a fleet in Marseille. And he built the fleet in Marseille at the same time, right? So I was pretty frustrated and upset here. And really the only, Spencer was willing to work with me, but he was, down to 2 centers. John was the only one at this point here that was, if I didn't try and keep him on side in some way, then I would just be attacked by all 3, I felt. And couldn't really deal with that very well.
When you see Germany at 11 and France at 9, that's 3 more dots than they need between the 2 of them to control the board.
Yep.
Did you feel a little insulted that they were still playing this kind of game when they were at 11 and 9?
when I'm in a game and I'm looking at players behaving this way, when the SC imbalance is that severe, I feel like my time is being wasted. Did you have any of that?
I mean, this board is different than a lot of tournament boards, right? Where even a high shared board top works well in a tournament setting. This was a winner take all type of board, right? And yeah, I was, at this point here, it felt like the two of them had just decided that one of them was going to win, and they were just going to trade dots or just make that happen as some way, and that they just weren't going to fight.
Yeah, and that I'm very sympathetic to what it must have been like for you as the player in third behind those two playing that game. That must have been very frustrating.
It was, and it shaped a lot of my decisions moving forward.
So what diplomatic leverage do you have here? Because, I mean, Ed's saying to you, oh, well, I had to do this to keep Ewok sweet, but surely he should feel that he needs to keep you sweet too, because you've got armies surrounding him in his Austrian dots. He's got one army defending two centers.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see that, I focus on Vienna, Budapest, and Romania as my next three.
Yeah.
Right. But, Greg's perspective at this point was, he violated our DMZ with that fleet build, but that's because I was the threat on the board, is what he and Ed kept saying, and that they needed to work together to keep me in check. Otherwise, I would just grow off of Turkey, and I would win the game. So they, Greg wasn't willing to work with me here. All that his perspective is that, basically if you help John rebound a little bit and become less of a threat, then he would be willing to go move on Ed.
So you go down to 6 or 7 while they stay at 9 and 11.
Right.
And what did you make of that deal?
It was a bad deal, right? There's no good answer to that type of a pitch. I was pretty frustrated by it. So that's why I decided.
Time I start dropping F-bombs.
I don't. I try and figure out a solution.
How very unlike you, Eric.
F-bombs are a solution of a fashion.
Well, so what, this was about where John and I started talking more seriously about how John also didn't like the way that they were approaching the game at this point either. Okay. And this is where I felt like we started to have some common ground about, if I did help him rebound some, we would have basically a fake war to try and get France and Germany fighting. That became pretty much our only goal for the next several years, was to get the two of them fighting. To where if I pulled back against Greg and Greg saw he wasn't going to get any growth off of me, right? Then his hand would be forced to go after Ed.
What's he going to do? Just sit there?
And if Ed saw that I was taking the Balkan centers and that he wasn't going to grow off of that, then his only growth opportunity was going to be off of Greg. Right? So that was my strategy moving forward here, was intentionally be weaker against John, who was going to grow some centers off of me. There was no doubt about that. And John wasn't always perfectly forthright either about his exact moves. There was a lot of that in here as well. But I did feel my only chances in this game at this point was to get France and Germany fighting somehow. And that shaped the whole rest of my game.
Now, we already know from our interview with John that he was tipping you off as to what he was hearing from Greg and Ed.
Yeah.
Did he ever just flat out lie to you?
No.
He was thinking everyone's moves but his own.
I mean, yeah, we'll talk about a couple of those in here. But so for example, it was at this point where, part of John's price was me taking Romania. That's the only reason why I went and destroyed the fleet at this point. And went after Vienna, and Ed was still trying to sell me here, saying that he's going to go move at Greg. I still didn't have a good feel for really being able to believe him. But I started to shift my fleets back to, because I knew that Greg was coming into the Med. And this was in relation to him violating that DMZ.
At least Greg takes North Sea. That's got to be something, I suppose.
Yeah.
We're yet to speak to them, but from what we've heard so far, that was supposed to be a bounce. So there's arrangements here between France and Germany still.
Yeah, it still had the feel of kind of a fake war, right? And just being defensive against each other.
So we're gonna have two fake wars on the board. One between France and Germany, one between Italy and Turkey. Okay.
There sure weren't any real wars, so yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Are you worried when you see a cooperation between Germany and Turkey?
Yeah, a little bit there. But after these moves, John was pretty clear with me that, and Ed was as well, that, let's go to the fall. That John had promised that he would support Ed into Romania. Ed this whole time had been saying, Matt, go ahead and take back Vienna and Budapest, because he's going to be getting Romania. Okay, so Ed knew I was going to take those two centers. He was counting on John helping him into Romania. And then John was very clear with both of us that he just wasn't going to help Ed do that. So this is where John changed his tune, right? Because what I was pointing out to John as well was that was just a way for Ed to take Sevastopol.
Yeah.
And for Ed to lock down 11 centers while he's got a good defensive line against Greg. And that Ed's view of how he wins this game is he takes Moscow and Sev here and forms his defensive line there. And that's Ed's 11 centers. And then he wins the game. So John saw that as well. And that's, why he didn't go forward with helping Ed into Romania.
I guess
your best season in the game, Matt. That jumping up 3, taking 2 from the board topper, arranging a beleaguered garrison. Is it a beleaguered garrison? No, that came later, or earlier actually. But you still kept Romania. This must have been your warmest, fuzziest feeling of the game, yeah?
It was. I had also thought about bouncing John in Bulgaria and getting 3 full builds. That may have been part of my regrets was that John talked me out of doing that.
So you knew he was going there, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, it was obvious, right? What else is he
But
going
if
to do?
you bounced him out, you would have just been fighting John and Ed, right?
Right. Yeah. That's what I was worried about, right? I need to try and have somebody here that's going to work with me. I can't both dig John out of that corner and fight Greg at the same time and be successful.
What I expected here was I expected a G into Greece. I expected you to present to John an accommodation, but also make it very clear that you're only going so far.
Yep.
Did you need that fleet in the West badly enough that it was worth going to Ionian instead of Greece?
Probably not. Yeah. No,
that's what I expected. And when you didn't do it, I was like, wow, he's really selling out on this whole thing.
Yeah, I really was trying to show Greg conclusively that he wasn't going to be getting builds off of me.
I hindsight's 20/20, but I think if you had dropped into Greece instead of sending that into Ionian, then your next accommodation to John would have been Rum, and it would have been a good step in the right direction of, okay, we're going to get you in Rum. We're going to force Galicia. We're going to force Ukraine. We're going to put pressure on Moscow and Warsaw.
And that is what we talked about, right? So the plan was for him to take Romania, not Greece, like it turned out. And that, I still had to give John a direction to try and go, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's always the problem with Turkey. That's always the problem with Turkey. They're black mold.
Yep. So that was what the plan was that, Romania would be his and he could go try and press to the north.
Yeah. And I think he could have been more successful negotiating that if you'd sent a G into Greece.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Was he supposed to go south coast? Could you have got him to go east coast here? And so Rum was more obviously the next.
No, that's actually a good reminder. The agreement had been for him to go to the East Coast. So this is one of the small things that, and then after John made that type of difference, he said, well, if I'd gone to East Coast, it would have been too obvious to Greg and to Ed that we're not really fighting, and then they'll never fight. So I'm doing these small little things, right, to get the two of them fighting, but it still keeps eroding away my position. I was actually pretty forceful actually about him going to East Coast here. That's the thing I was trying to juggle and balance, right? Is those little things.
I'm going to say it again: black mold.
Okay, yeah, it's fascinating here. Did you have a chance during the game to watch what Eric and I were saying when we were watching these moves?
Yeah. No, I watched it
because we. Forgive me, Eric, if I'm speaking for you, and it's not the case.
Well, I was going to say it more nicely than I would. Go ahead.
I'm going to say we were pretty convinced that this was genuine. There was genuine animosity between John and you, especially after that stab on Serbia, and we were saying, why? God, if only they could work together, they might be able to do something again. Little did we know that you were working together.
Yeah, I distinctly remember us talking about this set of moves, and I remember talking about it looks like Matt is trying to work things out with John, and it looks like John isn't really forgiving him for that little stab.
Yeah. So I knew he was going to take Bulgaria, but it is accurate that he was supposed to go to the East Coast, and he decided not to. From his perspective, it was to try and keep up appearances. I don't know.
I mean, you might have a point.
And that was the hard thing about it, right? Is that was still a fair point to make. But I still wanted to safeguard my position the best I could. And a fleet in the east coast of Bulgaria is a good way to make that happen, right?
Yeah.
And he's still chirping in your ear about how push comes to shove at the end of the game, he'll help you over the top, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. John Anderson, you got to keep your hand on that iron rod, sir. That was not nice, man.
So we say goodbye to Tarsia, to Spencer at this point, as Russia is eliminated. Yeah. You build 2, and with a French army in Piedmont, I'm guessing that I can't remember this, but I'm guessing one's an army in Venice.
Go back 1 second, Chris. Go back 1 second.
Oh, what?
I know this isn't Spencer's show, but think about this. Ed really thought he was getting Romania, didn't he?
No. John was supposed to support it from Sev, but then John changed his mind and was pretty clear about that he wasn't going to help Ed into Romania.
But he thought that you weren't supporting yourself in Romania, right? He thought he was getting Romania.
Ed and I talked about this. He still kept talking about how much he wanted Romania. I would never be clear about what I was going to do.
Well, I think if he'd gotten Romania, all he would have used it for is to take 7, lock it down. But The reason I asked about all that was after all the after all the trust and everything that Spencer gave Ed, here we are, 1906. Ed's trying to take Spencer out of the game, taking not just one, but both of his last 2 dots. He treated Spencer pretty brutally.
He did. I didn't do Spencer any favors here at the end of taking his fleet in Romania, right? But at this point here, Spencer was willing to try and help me as much as he could, and I shouldn't have taken that fleet in Romania either in this year.
Well, if that was John's price, it's difficult, isn't it? I suppose. But,
it is.
With John already in Black Sea, you letting Spencer keep that fleet in Rum wasn't really going to give you much utility, brother.
I know. It just, if I was still trying to finish off John here, right, and that was kind of my decision to make here, right? Should I go and really try and finish off John, or should I rotate back to the west? That fleet would have been helpful to cut support. But this was the point where I said, I'm not going to be able to do that in time. I'm not going to be able to finish off John, and John's going to try and work with me. So let's just go with it and see what happens.
You didn't have the choice anyway. Greg made that choice for you.
Yeah.
And Tom,
Right,
I assume
thanks
this
for
was
backing
by
up for
your
me for a second.
request. Spencer tapping Ukraine.
Yeah, so that I knew that Ed couldn't kick me out of Romania.
Defiant last stand. Good for him.
Yeah.
Lions of Lucerne.
Army Con. Was that what you anticipated?
I knew it was going to be an army. I knew we were still trying to keep up appearances to get France and Germany fighting, so that was the natural build.
I'd have pushed for Army Ank real hard.
Yeah. But again, right? Germany and France are simply not fighting at all here still. And even me building a fleet in Naples was Greg saying, if I build a fleet down in Naples instead of Rome, he's going to pull back and go focus on Ed instead, right? So I was trying to do whatever I could from a negotiation perspective to switch up the narrative here, and nothing was working.
I remember being very sad when I saw that build in Fleet Naples.
Yeah, but it's not that different, because I can always go Tyrrhenian to Tuscany just as easily. I didn't feel like
the only real end result is it makes you less able to send Ionian east. If you'd have built in Rome, those 3 armies could have handled everything, and Ionian really could have stayed in the east. As it is, by building in Naples the way you did, you got to leave it there kind of in the center.
Yeah, but you can see that the builds between John and I are also trying to keep up the idea that we're fighting.
Yeah,
as well.
He didn't build Fleet Con, so that's a good thing.
Yeah,
right.
Did you think about calling for a draw at this point? Anyone? Any takers?
Yeah, that's right. Please.
What? I don't think we've asked anyone this. Was there any talk at any point about voting a draw, or was it always understood that it was going to go the distance in 1910?
Well, Ed started off the whole game with a big group thread about how we should just let Ed win and draw.
I think
at the
we
end
read
of
that.
1901, right? So
I think he sent. I think he
Ed.
sent Eric and me that just before he sent it to everybody.
Yeah, so that was the only time that a draw was ever talked about, was Ed at the beginning wanting us just to hand the game to him.
Think of all the time he could have saved. You should have
That's
listened.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, he had all sorts of points like that, right? And it turned out the same in the end, so we could have saved ourselves all that pain.
Yeah.